My parents refused to watch after my son for an hour while I took a final exam. But the next day, they drove 2 hours to take my brother's kids to a Disney trip, so I cut them off. 3 months later, they called, panicked. Where is the money you sent us every month? Sorry for the long post, but I need to get this off my chest. English isn't my first language. Dad's Italian, mom's American. So bear with me. Using a throwaway because my family knows my main account. I've been lurking on this subreddit for years, reading stories about family drama, but never thought I'd be posting my own saga here. Yet here I am, sharing what might be one of the most satisfying yet heartbreaking experiences of my life. It's taken me months to process everything that happened, to come to terms with the decisions I made and the consequences that followed. Some nights I still lie awake wondering if I went too far, if there was another way. Other nights I sleep peacefully, knowing I protected someone who matters more to me than anyone else in the world, my son. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about setting boundaries, recognizing toxic relationships, and ultimately choosing to break cycles of favoritism and emotional manipulation that have defined my family for generations. I, 32 male, am what you'd call the family disappointment. Not because I'm a failure, quite the opposite actually. I'm a civil engineer who owns a small construction consulting firm. The disappointment comes from the fact that I'm not my younger brother Ryan, 29 million. I've spent my entire life living in the shadow of his supposed potential, watching my accomplishments be diminished and dismissed while his smallest efforts were celebrated like Olympic victories. It wasn't always easy to recognize the pattern. When you grow up in a household with such blatant favoritism, you start to believe maybe there is something special about your sibling that you're missing, some quality that makes them more deserving of love and attention than you are. It took years of therapy after leaving home to understand that the problem wasn't me. It was the toxic family dynamic my parents had created. Let me paint you a picture of my childhood, a series of moments that individually might seem small, but collectively form the narrative of my place in the family. When I was 8, Ryan broke our mom's grandmother's china, a family heirloom that had been carefully preserved for generations. Mom had always told us how precious it was, how it had survived the journey from Europe with her ancestors. When Ryan sent it crashing to the floor during one of his tantrums, our parents simply said, "Accidents happen." They comforted him as he cried, telling him it was just old stuff anyway. 3 weeks later, when I accidentally broke a regular dinner plate while drying dishes, they lectured me for nearly an hour about being more careful and the cost of things, making me do extra chores to pay it back. At 16, after months of late nights perfecting my project, I won the state science fair with an innovative water filtration system. The judges said it showed exceptional promise for real-world applications. My science teacher called my parents personally to tell them how proud they should be. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Saturday. My parents promised they'd be there, but at noon, they informed me they couldn't make it because Ryan had a soccer game, a regular season game where he was benched the entire time as he had been all season. I accepted my award alone, watching other kids celebrate with their families while I stood off to the side, my certificate clutched in trembling hands. When I was 18, I received a full-ride scholarship to one of the top engineering programs in the country. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and I couldn't wait to share the news at dinner. When I announced it, expecting at least some acknowledgement of the achievement, their response was lukewarm. Well, engineering is a safe choice, I guess. Ryan's so creative with his music. They then spent the rest of the meal discussing Ryan's upcoming recital at the local coffee shop. The scholarship that would save them tens of thousands of dollars in tuition was barely mentioned again. At 22, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in civil engineering, already having job offers from 3 prestigious firms. My parents did come to the graduation, but they spent most of the ceremony on their phones, texting Ryan about his band's setup for their gig that night. They left immediately after my name was called, not even staying for the reception or to meet my professors, who wanted to congratulate them on raising such a dedicated student. They were more concerned about making it to the local bar, where Ryan's band was playing to an audience of maybe 20 people. When I started my own company at 25, having saved every penny and worked 80-hour weeks at a larger firm to learn the business, my mom questioned my decision. Isn't it risky? Maybe you should just work for someone else like Ryan does at the music store. Never mind that Ryan's job at the music store was part-time, paid minimum wage, and mainly allowed him to use the recording equipment after hours for his own projects. My business plan, market research, and the contracts I'd already secured meant nothing compared to Ryan's stability at a job he could barely maintain. Ryan was the golden child who could do no wrong, despite his track record of failure and dependency. He dropped out of college 3 times. First from the music program at State University, The professors just didn't understand his style. Then from community college, the curriculum was too restrictive for his creativity. And finally, from an online program, it was taking time away from his band practice. Each time, my parents consoled him, assuring him it wasn't his fault and that higher education just isn't for everyone. They funded each of these attempts fully, including buying him new equipment he claimed was necessary for his studies. He lived at home until he was 27, occupying the largest bedroom which my parents renovated twice to accommodate his studio needs, complete with soundproofing that cost them thousands. He had approximately zero life skills, couldn't cook beyond microwave meals, never learned to do laundry properly, and had to call my dad whenever a light bulb needed changing. But hey, he played guitar and was following his dreams. So apparently that made him better than me, the boring son who just built things for a living, who designed infrastructure that thousands of people use daily, who created jobs and contributed tangibly to society. Growing up, I watched Ryan get everything handed to him on a silver platter while I scraped by with the bare minimum. New guitar for Christmas? Of course. Not just any guitar, but a $1,200 Gibson that he had been eyeing. New amp for his birthday? Absolutely. A professional grade setup that most hobby musicians could only dream of. A complete drum set to round out his sound, despite having no knowledge of percussion? Why not? Meanwhile, I worked at the hardware store after school from age 16, putting in 20 hours a week while maintaining my 4.0 GPA just to buy my own graphing calculator for AP classes, because my parents said it was too expensive at $120. I saved for months to buy a decent laptop for college, while Ryan was given a top-of-the-line MacBook for his music. When I finally gathered the courage to point out the disparity in how we were treated, sitting my parents down for a serious conversation during my college sophomore year, my mom patted my hand condescendingly and said, "But Marcus, you're so responsible. We don't need to worry about you like we do with Ryan. You've always been so self-sufficient." My father nodded in agreement, adding, "Ryan needs more support to find his way. You've always known your path." Translation: you're the workhorse, he's the show pony. You exist to pull the cart. He exists to be admired. Your purpose is to achieve so we can pay for his failures. Your stability is not a virtue to be rewarded, but an expectation to be exploited. Fast forward to now. I've managed to build a successful life despite my parents' lack of support, though not without some personal hardships along the way. I'm divorced after catching my ex with her work colleague. Yeah, that old story that never gets less painful no matter how common it is. And have joint custody of my amazing 6-year-old son, Tommy. The divorce was ugly and expensive, emotionally draining in ways I couldn't have prepared for, but I fought with everything I had for 50-50 custody because Tommy is my world, my reason for pushing forward even on the darkest days. The divorce itself could be its own post, a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong person and rebuilding your life from the ashes of betrayal. I had been on a business trip to oversee a major project in Phoenix, a 3-day visit that got cut short when the client signed the contract early. Excited to surprise my wife with the good news and the commission that would follow, I caught an earlier flight home. I still remember the sinking feeling in my stomach as I pulled into our driveway, seeing an unfamiliar car parked there. Part of me knew instantly, but another part tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just a friend visiting. Maybe she had called someone for company while I was away. I opened our front door quietly, hearing music playing upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I heard laughter. Her laughter, but different somehow, more uninhibited than I'd heard in months. I found them in our bed, the bed we'd saved for months to buy when we first got married, the bed where Tommy had been conceived. Her work colleague, Jason, whom I'd met at company parties, whom I'd invited into our home for dinner just weeks before, was with my wife in the most intimate way possible. The scene that followed was both ridiculous and heartbreaking. Her shock, his scrambling for clothes, my eerie calm as I simply turned and walked out, driving aimlessly for hours until I could think straight. When I returned, she was alone, crying, full of excuses about how I wasn't emotionally available and how she had needs. Classic justifications that did nothing to mend what had been irreparably broken. She tried to take me for everything in the divorce, a viciousness emerging that I'd never seen in our 8 years together. She claimed I was an absent father because I worked too much, conveniently forgetting that my work had provided the comfortable lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, the vacations she posted about on Instagram, the private preschool Tommy attended. The judge, fortunately, saw right through her accusations, especially when I showed up with 3 years of meticulously documented school events, soccer practices, doctor's appointments, and bedtime stories logged in both digital calendars and a physical journal I'd kept. a habit I'd developed precisely because of my own childhood experiences of being overlooked and diminished. I was determined that Tommy would never doubt his importance in my life, never question whether he mattered. The evidence was overwhelming, but the legal battle still cost me $50,000 in fees, depleting a significant portion of my savings and forcing me to take out a loan against my business to cover the costs. Ryan finally got his act together at 27, married Brittany, sweet girl, way too good for him, and they have twin 4-year-old boys. He works as a music coordinator at a local church, basically playing guitar on Sundays and running the youth band. My parents, dad 65, mom 62, are retired. Dad from his job as a middle manager at a paper company, mom from her part-time gig as a receptionist at a dentist's office. They're always complaining about money, but somehow manage to maintain their lifestyle. Here's the kicker. For the past 5 years, I've been sending them $800 monthly to help with bills. I started this when Dad retired because they claimed Social Security wasn't enough. Me, being an idiot who believed in helping family, didn't think twice. They sold me this sob story about how Dad's pension got cut, how Medicare didn't cover Mom's prescriptions, how the house needed repairs they couldn't afford. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Family helps family, Dad would say. Funny how that only went one direction. Last month, I enrolled in an executive MBA program to grow my business. Classes are on weekends, which works with my custody schedule. But then I got selected to present at a major industry conference, a huge opportunity that could lead to contracts worth millions for my firm. The presentation was on a Wednesday at 2 p.m., and I had Tommy that week. This conference was the International Construction Management Summit. Getting selected to present is like being invited to pitch directly to every major player in the industry. My topic: innovative cost reduction in municipal infrastructure projects. Boring to most people, but these contracts could set my company up for the next decade. My regular babysitter had a family emergency. Her mom had a heart attack, which was totally understandable. My backup was sick with the flu. I called 3 daycare centers, but they were all full. I even considered bringing Tommy with me, but a 6-year-old at a professional conference wasn't going to work. I needed someone to watch Tommy from 12 to 4 p.m. That's it. 4 hours. I called my parents, who lived 25 minutes away in a nice suburban house that I later learned is mortgaged to the hilt. They're always posting on Facebook about being blessed grandparents and how family is everything. When I called my mom, I explained the situation and asked if they could watch Tommy for those few hours. She immediately made excuses about Wednesday not being good for them. When I asked if something was wrong or if they had a doctor's appointment, she mentioned my father's knee bothering him and that they were trying to rest more. I emphasized it was just 4 hours, that I could drop him off and pick him up, and that he just needed lunch and someone to watch him play with his Legos. She refused, suggesting I ask Ryan instead. When I reminded her that Ryan works Wednesdays, she simply said, "Well, I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do." That last line, "you always do," was the story of my life. Good old reliable Marcus will figure it out. He always does. I had to cancel the presentation, losing the opportunity. The company went with another firm. My business partner later heard through the grapevine that our competitor landed contracts worth $2.8 million from that single presentation. 4 days later, I was having lunch with a client who showed me pictures from their recent Disney World trip. As they were scrolling, I saw a familiar face in the background of one photo: my parents at Disney World with Ryan's twins. I literally choked on my sandwich. The client thought I was having an allergic reaction. I asked him to scroll back, and there they were, clear as day, wearing Mickey Mouse ears and grinning like idiots. I checked Instagram, and sure enough, Brittany had posted a whole album, Magical Week at Disney, with the best grandparents ever. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for making this happen. 7 days. They spent 7 days at Disney World with Ryan's kids, but couldn't watch my son for 4 hours. The photos showed them at character breakfasts, on private VIP tours, wearing matching Disney merchandise, having dinner at expensive restaurants, using FastPass for everything, and staying in a suite at the Grand Floridian. I counted the pictures. 247 photos across multiple posts. You know how many pictures they have with Tommy on their social media? 12. Total. Ever. I did the math. This trip cost at least $15,000. But the worst part was in one video where I heard my mom saying, "We've been planning this for months. The boys deserve such a special treat." They'd been planning this for months, while I'd been coordinating schedules for weeks to make sure they knew when I'd need help. I called my mom without pleasantries. I immediately mentioned seeing their Disney trip. After a long pause, she admitted she was going to tell me about it. I confronted her about spending a week at Disney, but being unable to watch Tommy for 4 hours. She dismissed me as being dramatic, saying Ryan's boys had been having a hard time adjusting to preschool, and they wanted to do something special. When I asked about when they last did something special with Tommy, she claimed they see him. I challenged her to name one time in the last 6 months, and she could only mention Christmas, when they stopped by for 20 minutes to drop off a $10 toy while bringing Ryan's kids full gaming systems. As the conversation escalated, she insisted they loved all their grandchildren equally. I informed her that the $800 I had been sending monthly would stop immediately. She was outraged, saying they depended on that money. When I pointed out they seemed to have plenty for Disney trips, she insisted that was different, that Ryan needed this. I simply said I had needed 4 hours and ended the call, blocking both their numbers afterward. The first week after our confrontation brought silence. Beautiful, peaceful silence. I actually slept better than I had in years. During the second week, Ryan began texting me, clearly panicked about what was happening with our parents. Mom and Dad are freaking out. What did you do? He sent a dozen more texts, each more desperate than the last, mentioning they couldn't pay their mortgage and that my mother was crying constantly. I ignored him, thinking this was destroying them, and that was good. By the third week, extended family started reaching out. My parents were apparently telling everyone I had abandoned them for no reason. I didn't respond yet, as I was gathering ammunition. My cousin Jennifer texted that my mom had called her mother crying, saying I cut them off out of nowhere. My aunt emailed, saying this wasn't like me and that my parents were worried sick. My uncle left a voicemail asking me to call him because my folks were in bad shape. I documented every message, call, and text, building my case methodically. In the fourth week, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my dad. He said we needed to talk about the money, revealing that my mother was having panic attacks and they couldn't pay their bills. When I questioned how they could afford Disney but not bills, he claimed it was a special occasion and a one-time thing. I told him I had looked at Mom's Facebook and seen cruises, weekend trips, and new furniture. A lot of supposed one-time things. When he insisted they were my parents and I couldn't just cut them off, I simply replied, "Watch me." Being analytical by nature, engineer, remember? I decided to do some digging. What I found was illuminating. I hired a private investigator, which may sound extreme, but I needed the truth. What he found was a goldmine of financial irresponsibility. My parents had refinanced their house 3 times in the last 10 years. They had $150,000 in credit card debt. They were leasing 2 luxury cars, a BMW for dad and a Mercedes for mom. They maintained a country club membership costing $500 monthly. Mom had a shopping addiction, spending an average of $2,000 monthly on clothes and jewelry. Dad's golf habit cost about $400 monthly, just in green fees. They'd also been giving Ryan about $1,000 monthly to help with the twins. But the real kicker was discovering they'd been telling different stories to different people to get money. They told my aunt they needed help with medical bills, told my uncle their roof was leaking, told their church friends they were struggling with utility bills, and told their neighbors they were supporting a sick relative. They'd been running a con game on the entire family, and I was the biggest mark. My parents called a family meeting at my aunt's house. They didn't invite me, but my cousin texted me about it. They were apparently trying to get relatives to pressure me into giving them money again. I crashed the meeting with receipts. Literally. I walked in with a briefcase full of documents. The room went silent, and Mom started crying immediately, her go-to manipulation tactic. I announced that since they were all discussing my supposed cruelty, I would share some facts. I brought bank statements showing my payments to them, screenshots of their Disney trip, their credit card statements, public record from a court filing I found, a spreadsheet showing where their money actually went, photos from their various vacations over the past year, and a sanitized version of the PI's report. I laid everything out on my aunt's dining table like I was presenting a case in court. I explained that for 5 years, I'd given them $800 monthly, a total of $48,000. In that same time, they'd spent over $200,000 on vacations, luxury items, and bailing out Ryan. Yet they couldn't watch my son for 4 hours. My aunt, Dad's sister, went pale and asked if this was true. My dad couldn't even look at her, his silence damning. I continued, explaining that they told me they were struggling with bills, told everyone they were barely getting by while living like lottery winners. My uncle stood up, face red, outraged that he had given them $5,000 the previous year because they claimed they might lose the house. My aunt revealed she had given them $3,000 for my mother's supposed surgery. Another cousin admitted lending them $2,000 for emergency car repairs. The room erupted as years of lies unraveled in real time. Mom tried to play victim, sobbing about how nobody understands the pressure we've been under, while Dad just sat there, defeated. Ryan, who had been silent, finally spoke, asking if it was true that the money he thought they were giving from their retirement was actually from me. The look on his face when he realized he'd been an unwitting accomplice in their scheme was priceless. 2 weeks later, I was served legal papers. My parents were suing me for financial abandonment and breach of verbal contract. They claimed that because I'd been giving them money for 5 years, I'd created a dependency and couldn't legally stop. Their lawyer was some ambulance chaser who probably took the case for a percentage. I hired the best contract attorney in the state, who laughed when he saw their filing, calling it the legal equivalent of a toddler's tantrum. We countersued for fraud. They'd been telling people I wasn't helping them to get money from relatives, and harassment. But then they tried to sue for grandparents' rights to see Tommy. The problem is, in our state, grandparents' rights only apply if they had an established relationship with the child. Thanks to their own neglect of Tommy, they had no case. The judge seemed annoyed at their lawyer, questioning how they could want visitation rights for a grandchild they couldn't babysit for 4 hours. Their lawyer tried to argue that I was alienating them from Tommy. My lawyer provided 3 years of text messages where I invited them to Tommy's events, all declined or ignored. School records showing they'd never attended a single function. Character statements from Tommy's teachers saying they'd never met his paternal grandparents. And a log showing they'd seen him for less than 10 hours total in the past year. My mom, being the boomer she is, decided to take the fight to Facebook. She started posting about how her ungrateful son had abandoned his family and how they were struggling to survive. Her posts included statements like, "When you give your child everything and they abandon you in your golden years," and praying for my son to find his way back to God and family. And some people forget where they came from. We're heartbroken, but we still love our misguided son. I didn't engage directly. Instead, I created a simple website, therealstoryofrobertandcarol.com, not their real names. I posted every receipt, screenshot, and financial document. I included a timeline showing every time they chose Ryan's kids over Tommy, every vacation they took while claiming poverty, every relative they'd scammed, and every lie they'd told. I made it look like a professional news site with a clean layout. Just the facts, no emotion, pure documentation. I then shared the link as a comment on her posts. The reaction was swift. Their friends started asking questions. Relatives demanded their money back. Their church, where Ryan works, started distancing themselves. Comments on her post went from "praying for you" to "is this true, Carol?" to "I can't believe you lied to us." The lawsuits were dismissed, obviously, but the legal fees bankrupted my parents. Turns out spending all your money on luxuries doesn't leave much for lawyers. The family meeting had opened everyone's eyes. My aunt and uncle demanded their money back. When my parents couldn't pay, they sued. Other relatives followed suit. Ryan tried to intervene, calling me and begging me to help them, insisting they were our parents. When I questioned whether they were acting like parents when they watched his kids for a week, but couldn't spare 4 hours for mine, he claimed it was different. When pressed on how, he insisted his kids needed that trip. I informed him that I had needed that presentation, which cost me millions in contracts. Ryan was shocked, having been told by our parents that I was being dramatic about some little work thing. He had no idea about the conference or the lost opportunity. Ryan admitted that his wife Brittany had been saying something seemed off about the money they received from our parents, noting it didn't add up with them being retired. That's when the final piece clicked for him. The house of cards collapsed quickly. The bank foreclosed on their house, their cars were repossessed, the country club banned them and sued for unpaid dues, their credit cards were maxed out and canceled, and they had to declare bankruptcy. But the best part was that during the family meeting, Brittany discovered they had been giving Ryan money. She was furious. They'd been struggling to pay their own bills while Ryan was taking money from our parents instead of working more hours. Brittany gave Ryan an ultimatum: cut them off or divorce. Ryan chose his marriage. My parents lost both sons in one fell swoop. Their golden child finally saw them for what they were. Last month, almost a year after the initial confrontation, and months after the legal and social media battles had largely subsided, my phone displayed an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would let unknown calls go to voicemail. Too many spam calls these days. But something, perhaps a lingering vigilance about my parents finding new ways to reach me, made me answer. "Hello?" I said cautiously, half expecting a robotic voice offering to extend my car warranty. "Marcus, son, please." The voice was ragged, diminished, but unmistakably my father's. He sounded older than his 65 years, His characteristic confidence replaced by something I had never heard from him before. Genuine desperation. I felt a complex surge of emotions. Anger still simmering beneath the surface, a reflexive concern that had been conditioned into me over decades, and a strange emptiness where familial love should have resided. "Who is this?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well, wanting to force him to identify himself, to acknowledge that he was now a stranger who needed to introduce himself rather than someone who could assume connection. "Don't play games," he rasped, a hint of the old impatience breaking through the veneer of supplication. We're living in our car." The admission seemed to pain him physically. Each word dragged reluctantly from his throat. "Sounds uncomfortable," I replied, my voice deliberately neutral, neither sympathetic nor mocking, just stating a fact, the way he had stated facts about my insufficiencies throughout my childhood. There was a pause, filled only with his labored breathing. When he spoke again, the desperation had returned, pride momentarily subsumed by necessity. "We need help, just enough to get a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just so we're not on the street." "I thought you had plenty of money," I said, unable to resist twisting the knife slightly. "That's what you told everyone on Facebook, that I was exaggerating your financial troubles to justify abandoning you." Another pause, longer this time. We made mistakes. We're sorry." The apology sounded rehearsed, a line delivered without genuine understanding of what he was apologizing for. Sorry they got caught. Sorry their schemes collapsed. Sorry they were facing consequences. But not sorry for the years of manipulation, the emotional damage, the disregard for Tommy. "Are you sorry, or are you sorry you got caught?" I asked, voicing the thought directly. The silence that answered my question was damning in its length and discomfort. Finally, I decided to cut to the heart of the matter. "Let me ask you something, Dad. If you hadn't gotten caught, if I'd kept sending money, if everyone hadn't learned the truth, would you have ever spent time with Tommy? Would you have ever treated him like you treat Ryan's kids?" "Of course," he responded too quickly, the answer hollow in its automatic defensiveness. "When?" I pressed, refusing to let him off the hook with vague assurances. "You had 5 years of his life, 5 years of birthdays and Christmases and soccer games and school events. When exactly were you planning to start being grandparents to him?" We were going to," he stammered, unable to complete the lie convincingly. We both knew the truth. They had never intended to invest in a relationship with Tommy. He was collateral damage in their campaign to elevate Ryan's family while extracting resources from me. "No, you weren't," I said quietly. "You know what? I'll help you exactly as much as you helped me when I needed you. I'll give you exactly what you gave Tommy when he wanted grandparents who cared about him. Nothing." I heard rustling on the line, and then my mother's voice replaced my father's, shrill with indignation. "You're going to let us be homeless?" The caps lock voice, I thought absently, the digital equivalent of her screaming at me, as she had so many times in childhood when I failed to live up to her impossible expectations. "You let my son feel worthless," I replied, my voice remaining level despite the emotion rising in my chest. "You made him think he didn't deserve grandparents who cared. Tell me honestly, which is worse?" "He's just a child," she shrieked, abandoning any pretense of rational discussion. "He doesn't understand." "You're right," I agreed, surprising her into momentary silence. "He doesn't understand why his grandparents don't love him. He doesn't understand why they could spend a week at Disney with his cousins, but couldn't watch him for 4 hours so his dad could advance his career. He doesn't understand why Christmas at your house means expensive gifts and attention for Ryan's kids and an afterthought $10 toy for him. Do you want me to explain it to him? Do you want me to tell him it's because he's not Ryan's kid, and in this family that's all that matters?" "That's not true," she protested, her voice suddenly small. "We love Tommy. Love is action, Mom. Love is showing up. Love is making someone a priority. You and Dad have never done that for Tommy. Or for me." I sighed, suddenly exhausted by the circular conversation, by the decades of the same patterns playing out again and again. "I have to go now. Tommy's waiting for me to help him with his science project. Unlike some people in his life, I keep my promises to him." I hung up without waiting for her response. My hands were shaking slightly as I set the phone down on my desk, adrenaline coursing through my system from the confrontation. But beneath the physical reaction was a surprising sense of calm, of closure. I had said what needed to be said, clearly, and without the emotional outbursts that had characterized our interactions in the past. I had maintained my boundaries without cruelty, but also without wavering. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment to center myself, and then went to join my son in the living room, where he was arranging materials for his volcano project, his face lighting up as I entered. "Dad, I think I figured out how to make the lava look more realistic, he exclaimed, holding up a bottle of dish soap mixed with red food coloring. That's awesome, buddy, I said, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him. Show me what you've got so far. As he enthusiastically explained his design modifications, I felt the tension from the phone call melting away, replaced by the simple joy of being present with someone who mattered, someone worth showing up for. This, I thought, is what family should feel like. 6 months have passed since that confrontation. My parents now live in a studio apartment in the bad part of town. My mother works at Walmart, and my father delivers newspapers. They're in their 60s, starting from scratch. None of the family talks to them anymore. Ryan remains married, barely. Brittany made him get a second job, and they're in counseling. He hasn't spoken to our parents since Brittany discovered the truth about the money. Meanwhile, Tommy and I are thriving. My business has grown 40% this year, and Tommy is doing well in school. He asked about his grandparents once, and I explained that sometimes people make choices that hurt others, and when that happens, we have to protect ourselves by staying away from them. He thought about it and said, like how I don't play with Billy anymore because he always breaks my toys. I confirmed it was exactly like that. Last week, I ran into my aunt at the grocery store. She told me my parents had reached out to her for money, and she laughed in their faces. They called me dramatic when I warned them about their spending, she said. Now they want my help? Not a chance. The extended family has completely cut them off. Their former friends want nothing to do with them. Their church told Ryan they're not welcome at events anymore. Apparently, they tried to guilt church members into giving them money. They're pariahs, completely alone. And honestly, I sleep like a baby. The final update. Yesterday, I received another call from an unknown number while at my office reviewing blueprints for a new municipal project. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another sales call, but something told me to pick up. It was a social worker from the county's Department of Human Services, her voice professional but kind. She explained that Robert and Carol Williams had applied for emergency housing assistance and listed me, Marcus Williams, as a relative who might be able to provide support. The social worker was simply doing her due diligence in exploring all options before proceeding with their application. There was a time, perhaps a year ago, when such a call would have sent me into a spiral of conflicting emotions. Anger at their audacity, guilt at their predicament, anxiety about what others would think if I refused. But as I sat there in my quiet office, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built through my own efforts, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'm not able to assist them, I said simply, my voice steady. May I ask why? The social worker inquired. No judgment in her tone, just gathering information for her file. I took a moment to consider my response, wanting to be truthful without unloading years of family history on this woman who was just doing her job. They chose not to be part of my son's life when we needed them, I finally said. They made their priorities very clear through their actions. I'm respecting the boundaries they established. There was a brief pause, and I could hear her typing notes. I understand, she said. Thank you for your time, Mr. Williams. That was it. No drama, no emotional manipulation, no guilt trips. Just a simple question and a simple answer. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a few minutes, waiting for the familiar rush of complicated feelings that usually followed any interaction related to my parents. But it never came. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction at their downfall, not guilt about their circumstances, not anger about their continued attempts to use me, not even relief at having maintained my boundaries. Nothing. They're just strangers now who happen to share my DNA, people whose connection to me is a biological accident rather than a meaningful bond. I returned to my blueprints, made a note to pick up Tommy's favorite ice cream on the way home, and continued with my day. Their chapter in my life had finally, truly closed.